Each night, a candle is lit, and the whispering tomes open. Inside are the strange, the forgotten, the stories time tried to silence. Some say history is written by the victors, but here the lost are given voice. Breathe deeply and follow me into the hidden chapters of history.
The word that burned you, hear the word witch, and already it carries the smell of ash. But once, long before sermons and trials, it was a word of skillwicks for women, Wicca for Manan, Old English root meaning to bend or to shape. It described someone able to turn the invisible currents of the world, not against nature but with it, to heal a fever, to coax rain, to find a missing child. These were acts of bending, of shaping. In that earliest sense, a witch was not a criminal, a witch was useful. The craft itself is older than language. Step back beyond the alphabet and you find its traces etched into clay and bone. In Paleolithic caves, figures painted with red ochre hold their hands toward animal herds. The first sympathetic magic belief that image could influence reality. In Neolithic villages, archaeologists uncover small idols of women with round hips and seed-patterned bellies. They call them fertility goddesses, but they might also be manuals of survival, reminders that birth, soil, and harvest share the same rhythm. To touch the figurine before planting was to invite that rhythm to return. Across the ancient Near East, the idea spreads like migrating grain. In Sumer, temple records mention the Alaipu, healers who used words, smoke, and salt to drive away illness. Their chants survive on tablets baked 4,000 years ago, half medicine, half poetry. In Egypt, priests of Hecomagic, as a divine force recited spells, beside physicians who mixed honey and resin for wounds. To the Egyptians, magic and medicine were the same word written in two directions. One worked on the body, the other on the spirit. Both sought balance. You move north and west, through bronze and iron, where tribes guard their own formulas. In the forests of Gaul, the druidesses watch the skies turning, counting moons for the felling of sacred trees. In the Aegean, women grind herbs beneath the stars, whispering to Hecate, goddess of thresholds. Her torches burn at crossroads, so travelers never lose their way. Each of these figures, the healer, the oracle, the midwife, shares the same quiet authority, knowledge carried without temple walls. The world calls them necessary until power decides they are dangerous. Language begins to divide that knowledge. In Greece, the word pharmakis means both poisoner and healer. From it will come pharmacy, a discipline born from ambiguity. Homer's Odyssey introduces Circe, a sorceress who turns sailors into beasts not out of cruelty, but to reveal their nature. Her story, retold for centuries, becomes the first caution about women whose wisdom rivals God's. The Romans inherit her image and give it a legal category of inifica, one who works with drugs, one who might kill with them. Roman law distinguishes religio, the sanctioned rite, from superstitio, the private ritual performed without approval. The shift is subtler bureaucratic wound, but it opens the path from healer to heretic. You stand now in a Roman marketplace. Beneath the marble colonnade, vendors sell amulets against envy, lead tablets etched with curses to be buried under doorsteps. The city thrives on contradiction. Temples dedicated to every imported deity, and yet decrees banning unsanctioned divination. Magic is both tolerated and feared, absorbed and exiled. The same empire that deifies Isis and Cybele also crucifies those who practice in their name without license. Control is the empire's true religion. When Christianity rises within that world, it inherits Rome's suspicion of private power. Early theologians read the old words magus, maleficason, sharpen them into spiritual weapons. Augustine warns that demons answer pagan prayers. The Didaic lists sorcery beside murder. By the 4th century, as emperors convert, the first anti-magic laws appear nullus, haruspex, nullus, mathematicos no, seers, no astrologers. Magic becomes not merely illegal but unholy. The line between religion and witchcraft is drawn by whoever commands the pulpit. Still, the countryside remembers differently. In scattered farms across Britain and Gaul, women grind willow bark for pain, hang herbs above doorways, trace circles of salt against the evil eye. Their charms survive precisely because they work, because fever breaks, because crops recover. Church councils issue warnings, but the warnings spread the vocabulary they hope to erase. Maleficium evad working enters, the Latin lexicon. The witch gains a name shaped by accusation rather than craft. You walk through centuries of twilight lore. The canon episcopi written around the 10th century admits that some women believe they ride with Diana by night, but insists it is only illusion, a delusion of the devil. Even so, the very act of naming it keeps the story alive. Folklore mixes with theology until neither can be separated. The wise woman who once healed now stands at the edge of the village, both sought and shunned. Her reputation depends on outcome. If the child recovers, she is blessed. If the child dies, she is blamed. The same hands that once shaped life now hold its danger. From here the centuries quickened inquisition, the manuals of witch hunting, the bonfires that turn the word witch into sentence. But at the beginning, before the smoke and the fear, it was simply a verb to shape. Every spell, every prayer, every whispered charm shared that intention to bend the invisible just enough to survive another season. You realize that the story of witchcraft begins not with rebellion, but with recognition. The moment humanity understood that the world responds, that discovery is older than gods, older than writing, older than any creed that later condemned it. It is the quiet agreement between mind and matter that thought leaves an imprint, that ritual remembers. The word which will change languages, cross empires, gather centuries of accusation. Yet, beneath all those meanings, the original remains intact, glowing like an ember. Someone who knows that what you touch, you change. And from that ember the rest of history waits temples turning to churches, charms to confessions, goddess to ghost. The fires are not lit yet, but the wood is stacked. The word has learned to burn. To shape as you stand at the edge of the Ice Age, where belief is still drawn in charcoal on stone. The air is cold enough to crystallize breath into mist, and the cave mouth behind you exhales the same rhythm as the sea. Inside, torches flicker against walls, painted with animals that no longer exist outside memorabism. Aurochs, horses with bellies swollen by pigment and reverence. Each line curves like a pulse. Each handprint beside it is a promise that the world can listen. Anthropologists will one day call this sympathetic magic the first attempt to influence nature through image. When the hunters paint a wounded stag, they do not seek art, they seek outcome. They believe that to depict is to prepare. The arrow sketched in ochre is the one already loosed in spirit. When the painting dries, the hunt will follow its design. You can feel the faith humming in the darkness, observation becoming intention, intention becoming ritual. Outside, the women of the camp grind pigment with fat and marrow, mixing color as medicine. They press red dust across foreheads to guard against fever, white clay on infants to cool their skin. Later centuries will call this cosmetics, then witchcraft. But here it is, early chemistry on oxide and calcium carbonate, used to trick both sun and spirit. Every gesture carries a theory, that the world is porous, that substance and soul can trade places if addressed correctly. You'll move forward 1,000 years at a step. Glaciers recede. Valleys bloom. The small bands of nomads become villagers surrounded by fields. With settlement comes a new kind of magic, predictive rather than reactive. To plant grain is to wager on time itself, and so the people begin to measure it. They raise stones in circles aligned to solstice and star, calibrating heaven to earth. These megaliths will one day be called calendrical temples, but to their builders they are clocks made of faith. Each dawn that touches the central pillar affirms that order still governs chaos. At night, you join them in the field. Women stand barefoot among the furrows, scattering ash from the previous harvest. Their voices rise in low unison, syllables shaped by breath more than by grammar. They are calling to the earth, mother, the unseen matrix that turns seed into food. In their cosmology, soil is not dead matter, but sleeping flesh. Planted grain is a burial performed in hope of resurrection. When the first shoots appear, they thank both sun and corpse, because one cannot live without the other. Centuries later, archaeologists will name their figurines the Venus of Willendorf, the goddess of Losol, the thousands of clay bodies unearthed from hearths across Europe and Anatolia. Each figure holds her stomach, breasts, or womb symbols of abundance rather than beauty. They are not idols but instructions. The people bury them at field corners as insurance against drought, then dig them up after harvest to remind the soil that gratitude is part of the contract. You kneel beside one such offering and notice the simplicity of the tools. No priests, only repetition. The power lies in cycle, not spectacle. Magic at this moment in history is indistinguishable from maintenance. Further east, in the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, written language begins to coil across clay. Among the earliest words scratched by stylus is one for Inheduana, title meaning High Priestess of the Moon. She will become the first named author in history, composing hymns to Inanna, goddess of love and war. Her verses describe rituals you can almost see, votive oil poured from silver jars, drums echoing like thunder, dancers wearing veils embroidered with stars. Each movement synchronizes with the phases of the moon. converting astronomy into devotion. When she writes, "Inanna, you rain fire and life alike," she defines the paradox that will haunt witchcraft forever, the power to heal and to harm. Occupying the same hand, travel south to Egypt and you watch the priests of Heka, the divine art of effect. In narrow chambers, they recite words carved earlier on papyrus scrolls. One spell begins, "As I utter thy name, so the world obeys." Their belief is linguistic engineering. Correct speech rearranges reality. They wear amulets shaped like ankhs and scarabs, symbols of rebirth. To them, every glyph is alive. Centuries later, medieval grimoires will copy their structure almost verbatim, disguising it under Latin prayer. The roots of incantation lie here in the idea that sound itself has substance. West of the Nile, on Mediterranean islands, still unnamed, bronze tools flash under a full moon. Women smear themselves with olive oil and ochre, circling fires, while men strike bronze gongs that mimic thunder. Anthropologists will find residue of barley and honey on these sites, fermented offerings poured into earth pits. Analysis will reveal that honey ferments to ethanol, that barley sprouts when exposed to heat and moisture. Ritual is research conducted in symbols. Every discovery about germination hides inside a prayer. Time folds again. You arrive in the forests of Central Europe around 2500 BCE. Clearing glows with torches set in wooden posts. The people of the Belgica culture gather around a figure crowned with stag antlers and wearing a cloak stitched from bird feathers. He or she, gemmed or blurred, intentionally raises hands toward the sky and marks the air with ash. The community believes this gesture opens a bridge between species. Later, Celtic myth will call the figure Cernunnos, Lord of Animals, but here it is simply mediation, asking the hunted to forgive the hunter. When the deer is killed the next morning, its bones are arranged in a circle and sprinkled with mead. Nothing is wasted, not even guilt. You watch similar fires appeared across continents. Shamans in Siberia beating drums carved with constellations. Villagers in the Indus Valley burning aromatic resin to appease household spirits. Nomads on the Eurasian steppe tying strips of cloth to trees the earliest prayer flags so that wind can deliver their requests. Each act expresses the same hypothesis, that consciousness is participatory, that intention alters outcome. From these scattered experiments grows the first theology of cause and effect. Magic becomes the folk branch of science. Science, the institutionalized child of magic, when later philosophers call witchcraft ignorance. They forget that its earliest rituals created the observational habits that make philosophy possible. Counting moons, predicting floods, storing herbs by seasoned ease. Our empirical behaviors performed in the language of faith. You move to the shore of the Black Sea, where a small village carves spiral patterns into limestone talismans. The spiral mirrors the paths of planets. Wearing it near the heart is meant to steady emotion. Excavations thousands of years later will find traces of copper and turquoise dust pressed into the grooves, materials with measurable electrical conductivity. Without realizing it, these artisans are experimenting with magnetism, associating it instinctively with vitality. The charm works often enough to be remembered. As civilizations rise, specialization follows. The community healer becomes distinct from the priest. The priest serves doctrine. The healer serves outcome. That division, quiet at first, will harden into opposition. But for now, both coexist. In Mesopotamia, temple women brew potions for childbirth and write their formulas in cuneiform: ginger for nausea, willow for pain, mandrake for conception. Their recipes cross trade routes and centuries. When Greek physicians later claim discovery of these cures, they are translating tablets older than their language. Night in Anatolia, you stand on a hillside dotted with fires. The people of Catalioch have built a shrine to the mother with leopards, seated goddess flanked by predators whose mouths curl into patient smiles. Inside the mud brick room, a woman traces patterns in blood on the wall. She mixes it with ochre and fat, creating a pigment that glows under torchlight. The ritual records the idea that creation demands sacrifice not as punishment, but as exchange. Modern observers will call this superstition. Evolutionary psychologists will call it social cohesion. But in this room, it is physics disguised as reverence. Energy conserved through offering. The ceremonies repeat across centuries with local dialects of gesture. In northern Africa, women sing to the moon as they weave linen, believing rhythm protects the thread from snapping. In northern Europe, small wheels of bone are carved with spokes representing the sun's path. They are spun before planting to wake the ground. Both customs will survive, transmuted into later witchcraft, the wheel of the year, the witch's spindle, the dance around the maypole. Each began as agronomy, expressed through grace. You'll travel now to the islands of the Aegean around 1500 BCE. The Minoans build their sanctuaries on mountaintops rather than in valleys. Priestesses in flounced skirts raise serpents above their heads, symbols of renewal because snakes shed what they no longer need. Excavated frescoes show them surrounded by lilies and double-axis the Liberissa, sign later misunderstood as a weapon but originally emblem of balance. The ceremonies mark lunar eclipses, when the serpent of shadow crosses the sky. To them, it is not omen of death, but proof that even darkness has its cycle. Centuries later, when Greek poets write of witches drawing down the moon, they are remembering these mountaintop nights. You descend the timeline against Phoenician traders carrying amulets of glass, Etruscan seers reading the flight of birds, Hebrew scribes forbidding the witch of Endor. Every civilization repeats the same dialogue. Fascination, dependence, then fear. Magic provides control. Religion demands monopoly. Yet even as decrees spread, the rituals persist in kitchens, in childbirth chambers, in harvest fields. The instruments change bronze knife to iron sickle, chant to psalm, but the impulse remains unchanged, to ask the world to cooperate. But you find yourself back in the darkness of a cave, but now it belongs to the Bronze Age rather than the ice. At its center stands a stone altar, stained by centuries of smoke. Around it lie small tokens, shells, bits of bone, charred grain. A woman steps forward holding a bowl of water. She breathes across its surface until it trembles, then peers into the ripples. Historians will call this scrying divination by reflection. But to her, it is dialogue. The shimmer of torchlight across water reveals patterns, perhaps cognition tuned to uncertainty. She interprets them for the tribe. The hunt will be safe, The rains will come. The dead are satisfied. Her accuracy ensures her survival. Her gender ensures her suspicion in centuries yet unborn. The ceremony ends quietly. The fire dwindles, replaced by stars. The people sleep, while embers glow like scattered eyes. You remain awake, watching the smoke twist upward into the same spiral carved on ancient stones. It rises unbroken, through time, through temples and towers, through libraries and pyres. That spiral is the lineage of witchcraft. Experiment repeating as ritual, memory repeating as myth. And as dawn eggers over the hills, you understand why they called themselves shapers. Not because they ruled the world, but because they believed it could be spoken to and might, on certain nights, answer back. The languages of magic, the fires of the early world fade behind you. The night air is cool, threaded with smoke and the scent of grain. The voices that once rose in wordless chant now drift toward something more deliberate, pattern, rhythm, repetition. The first language of magic is being born. You walk among them as they work. Around each hearth, people murmur syllables that sound like wind through reeds. They are not words yet, but intentions shaped by breath. The spell begins as imitation. The hiss of a snake to protect against its bite. The crack of a branch to call the rain. These are echoes pretending to be commands. The first grammar of survival. What matters is not understanding, but vibration. The sound itself carries the faith. Centuries pass like exhalations. Language thickens. Symbols appear. In Sumer, priests scratch lines into wet, clay-wet-shaped marks, recording not just trade, but invocation. Among the lists of grain and cattle are instructions to ward off illness. Write the name of the demon on clay. Break it. Bury it. Each tablet is both document and charm. The clay remembers touch. Destruction seals the cure. You'll watch a scribe inscribe a line, whispering the phrase as he does. To write is to repeat. To repeat is to make real. The Egyptians refine the art. Their hieroglyphs are not letters, but entities, living pictures. To carve a jackal is to invite the presence of Anubis. To draw an eye is to create one that sees. In the Book of the dead learn to speak again through spells written in red ink, each word a bridge between breath and eternity. The scrolls rustle like leaves in desert wind. The priests call it Heka the Force that makes speech perform miracles. You watch one press his reed pen into pigment made from crushed ochre and honey, the scent sweet and metallic. When he writes a god's name, he leaves a small gap in the line, afraid the symbol might summon more than metaphor. In Crete and the Aegean, inscriptions appear on discs and seals, spirals of script still unreadable to scholars millennia later. They call it lineare, but it resists translation. Perhaps it was not meant to be understood by the living. The lines curved like rivers, looping inward toward a center that looks like a sun. You realize this is not language as communication, but language as labyrinthy, word a step deeper into the sacred. Further north, the Celts and Norse carve runes into bone and oak. Each mark carries both phonetic and spiritual charge for you, for cattle, kinas for fire, alges for protection. To carve a rune is to risk its consequence. The carver whispers the rune's sound as the knife cuts, blending voice and motion. When he finishes, He stains the wood with his own blood to give the symbol life. Later chroniclers will call it barbaric. But here, in the chill of the forest, it feels mathematical language reduced to its most efficient formula, meaning through shape. You pass into the Mediterranean, where Greeks begin to write their hymns in measured verse. They discover that rhythm commands memory, that repeated meter makes belief permanent. The Orphic hymns, dedicated to unseen gods, blend poetry with precision. You listen as one recites by torchlight, "I call upon you, night, eldest of all things born, who covers all in silence and in dream." The cadence is deliberate, measured to the breath. He is not begging, he is aligning. His syllables fall like the turning of planets. The spell has become art. In Rome, magicians etch their requests onto thin sheets of lead and roll them like scrolls to Phyxians, cursed tablets buried beneath thresholds or thrown into wells. The words twist like vines, pleas for love, revenge, victory. Some call upon Jupiter, others on nameless spirits older than the city itself. The Latin is crude, full of errors, but its purpose is precise, to bind. Language here is chain, forged by grammar and desperation. You touch one tablet and feel the etching bite into metal. It is the first evidence that writing can wound. Time unfolds further. In medieval Europe, monks cobygrim-wise illuminated with gilded initials that catch the candlelight between the psalms and sermons. They hide marginalia tiny, drawings of beasts, strange alphabets, diagrams of planetary motion. They call them signatures, symbols said to correspond to divine forces. The word itself becomes an object of power. Soturae repo, tenet opera rotas a palindrome, written in Latin that reads the same in every direction. Pilgrims carve it into walls for protection. The letters loop endlessly, a visual incantation against chaos. But still the language is multiplied. Hebrew Kabbalists study the names of God as equations. Each letter a number, each number a vibration. Arabic alchemists chart the correspondences between sound and substance, mapping the elements onto words. In every culture, language and power remain intertwined, Nietzsche claiming that creation began with speech. Let there be, they all say, in one form or another. And there is. You pause beside a table littered with manuscripts. The ink is black as obsidian. The pages smell of smoke and salt. Across one sheet, a hand has written, verbum est vinculum. The word is a bond. The candle beside it flickers, as if agreeing. You begin to realize that the true magic was never in arbs or stars, but in articulation itself. Every charm, every prayer, every whispered curse is a syntax of hope. The human voice, trembling, certain, terrified, is the most persistent spell the world has ever heard. Even now, when the old tongues have been buried beneath layers of translation, their pulse remains. Scientists speak of frequencies, programmers of code, poets of rhythm, all different dialects of the same desire, to name, to command, to connect. The witch's spell, the priest's prayer, the mathematician's formulae, they share the same ancestry. Out, sir, dawn breaks over a library window. The letters on the glass glow faintly in reflected light. You trace one with your finger, and it feels warm, alive. Somewhere, far in the distance, a bell rings, the call to language itself, to the endless human need to speak the unseen into being. Priestesses and poisons. You wake to sunlight glinting off bronze, to a world that has traded stone circles for temples. The villages of clay and reed have thickened into cities. Courtyards fill with incense, and the bleating of goats bound for sacrifice. The smell of barley and smoke mingles with myrrh carried on the morning wind. The people live close together, Nalmud brick walls washed with lime, flat roofs where herbs dry in woven baskets. In narrow alleys hang strips of linen, dyed with saffron and indigo, their edges stiff with dust from the desert road. Within these walls move the priestesses. In Mesopotamia they are called Entu keepers of the temple. You see them crossing courtyards paved with fired clay, their sandals whispering over red mats. They wear long woolen gowns belted high beneath the breast, the fabric dyed with crushed pomegranate and edged in tassels to mark rank. Bronze pins catch the light at their shoulders. Small cylinders of lapis lazuli hang from their necks, carved with protective sigils. Around them rise ziggurat styrus towers the color of dried blood, deach levels stacked with storerooms of barley, honey, and oil. Inside, the air is cool and smells of cedar. The entombed altars where bowls of burning resin smoke upward like messages. When they speak the words of a healing charm, they mix crushed dates and powdered shell into paste, smearing it across clay figurines to draw sickness out and bury it in the earth. Across the sea, on the banks of the Nile, the priestesses of Isis live within temple complexes built of limestone and blue-painted plaster. Palm fronds shade courtyards where ibises stalk the sand. Their linen robes cling, translucent in the heat, pleated so finely they shimmer when they walk. Each woman shaves her head smooth and wears a wig of black curls perfumed with lotus oil. Gold bands circle their upper arms. Copper mirrors hang at their waists. When they move, the air ripples with scent lotus, frankincense, salt. They sing to the goddess as they grind minerals for pigment, malachite for green, ochre for red. The walls behind them bloom with hieroglyphs that picture what their voices describe Isis spreading wings over the sleeping Osiris, promising resurrection in light and water. To the north, in Crete and the Aegean, the Minoan priestesses live among courtyards of painted stone. Their homes are palaces in miniature, white plaster walls streaked with vermilion, floors set with shells. You find them at the mountain shrines, skirts flared wide in layered flounces, bare chests gleaming with oil. Snakes coil through their hands like ribbons of living bronze, their hairs knotted high and crowned with diadems shaped as lilies. They sleep on woven mats beside jars of grain and honey, their chambers smelling of beeswax and sea air. At night they climb the terraces to light torches in offering to the moon. Their rites are part dance, part astronomy, gesture timed to the orbit of a visible planet. When they lift their torches, the mountainside mirrors the stars. In Anatolia, among the hills of what will become Turkey, the followers of Cybele dwell in stone huts built into the rock itself. Their robes are heavy wool, striped in ochre and wine red. Around their necks hang beads of bone and copper bells that chime with every movement. They live close to their flocks. Goats wander freely through doorways blackened by hearth smoke. When winter storms roll down from the plateaus, they gather inside to beat drums, stretched with hide, a heartbeat for the goddess who is both mother and mountains. Outsiders hear the sound and think it frenzies. For the worshippers it is calibration, the pulse of the earth measured in rhythm. Each culture refines the same vocabulary of power: rhythm, repetition, transformation. Their dwellings change, their clothes evolve, but the gestures remain: grinding, anointing, binding, burning. You can chart history by fabric and flame. The wool of Mesopotamia, the linen of Egypt, the silk of future empires, all are vessels for intention. Now step into a Greek household near the 6th century BCE. The priestess of Hecate tends a shrine at the crossroads outside town. She lives in a small courtyard house with whitewashed walls and vines climbing the doorway. Her cloak is dark blue, trimmed with bronze thread. A crescent-shaped brooch holds it closed. Beside her hearth lie jars of honey, garlic, and egg offerings for protection. When night falls, she covers her hair with a veil and walks barefoot to the stone marker where 3 roads meet. She lights 3 torches, one for each aspect of the goddess, and sets small cakes of barley on the ground. Dogs bark in the distance. The torches sputter in wind that smells faintly of rain and iron. To passing travelers she appears spectral, but her ritual is civic duty-keeping, balance between household and wild. In Rome, centuries later, her image will darken. The same woman becomes Venefica Poisoner. The same arbs that heal are now suspect. Markets that once sold mandrake and drew under the blessing of Venus now whisper prices behind veils. The women wear plain stolus, unadorned linen to avoid attention. They live at the edge of the Subura, where alleyways drip with runoff from the baths. At dusk they close shutters, grind roots in bowls of bronze, and mix tinctures by lamplights. Some recipes are medicine, others defense against the law. Their homes smell of vinegar and crushed laurel. When a neighbor's child recovers from fever, they are thanked. When a senator's son dies of unknown illness, they are questioned. Reputation becomes the boundary between priestess and criminal. Yet, even in the shadow of empire, the craft remains practicable. Roman matrons hang charms against miscarriages, small figures of terra mater carved from coral. Apothecaries sell powders labeled Amuletum Bon Fortuna, the good luck dust. On festival nights, noblewomen wear necklaces of glass beads filled with herbs to ward off envy. Fashion disguises the old religion. Jewelry becomes spellwork refined. You notice how the settings mirror their beliefs. The Mesopotamian ziggurat, rises and terraces toward heaven. The Egyptian temple burrows inward into mystery. The Greek shrine stands at a crossroads where choice divides. The Roman house contains a private altar, the lararium where ancestors are fed with wine. Architecture itself becomes theology. To live in these spaces is to walk through diagrams of faith. Through each century the attire, the dwellings, the rituals evolve, but the thread remains unbroken. The priestess becomes midwife, then apothecary, then witch. The plants in her mortar follow her through time: henbane, poppy, mandrake, belladonna. Botanists will later classify them as Solanacea, the nightshade family. Poets will remember them as instruments of flight. Both are correct. Their alkaloids dilate the pupils, slow the heart, blur the line between waking and dream. The women who learn these effects by experiment call them medicines. Inquisitors will call them pacts. By the 1st century CE, the ancient cities glitter with marble, but beneath that polish the same smoke curls from hearths, the same chants drift through shutters. The priestesses still shape the unseen. They have merely changed address. The empires that rise above them depend on their knowledge even while pretending to fear it. From woven huts to palaces, from clay altars to marble sanctuaries, their craft endures in secret, the quiet art of balancing what is alive against what must die. And as night falls over the Mediterranean, torches flare once more on a hillside. Linen sleeves glow like paper. Bronze jewelry flickers like embers. The women raise their arms toward the dark horizon and chant to the goddess whose names they have carried across millennia. Wind stirs the hem of their robes. Somewhere in the valley, a child wakes from fever and breathes easily. The priestesses return to their homes, walled, windowed, civilized, but the smell of earth follows them in. It always does. The demon in the mirror. You stand in a city of marble and smoke. Rome at its height hums like a living machine, streets bright with oil lamps, temples thick with the scent of burnt myrrh. The shrines of Isis and Hecate, once open to the night, now hide behind doors heavy with lore. Somewhere between the pillars, the word superstitio has replaced ritual. It means too much belief in the wrong place. It means the empire has learned to fear what it cannot regulate. Inside one of these houses, a woman grinds herbs by lamplight. The mortar is bronze, the table marble. Her bracelets click softly as she works. She is known in the neighborhood for her cures poultices for fever, charms for safe childbirth. She keeps her hair bound in a red ribbon, the color of protection, and ties it off before she whispers the name of a goddess she no longer speaks aloud in daylight. When the potion cools, she sets it beside a clay figure shaped from bread and salt. Tomorrow she'll burn both in offering. If the child survives, she'll be praised. If not, her name will circulate in the marketplace with a different tone. The same hand that heals can now be accused of poison. The empire has begun to codify fear. Lex Cornelia de Sicoris et Beneficissa. Law against poisoners and magicians throws its way through the courts. It is not the gods who condemn, but the magistrates. To own certain powders is suspicion. To be a woman who knows their use is proof. The bronze mirror on her wall reflects her face in fragments, warped by age. She looks into it and wonders if she already fits the story they're writing for her. Beyond her walls, Christianity gathers momentum in catacombs and tenements. Its followers speak of one God, one truth, one salvation. The old pluralities, Isis, Artemis, Hecate, Cybele, are recast as rivals to heaven. The sermons are soft at first, gentle warnings against idolatry. Then edicts follow, signed in imperial Latin, banning divination, forbidding sacrifices, branding the oracles as mouths of demons. The torchlight of the priestess becomes, in scripture, the flicker of perdition. We walk through centuries compressed into the turning of a page. The temples fall silent, their statues toppled or baptized. Pagan priests trade robes for official titles under Christian rule, but the women have no such translation. They retreat to kitchens and workshops, keeping their calendars of arbs and moons alive beneath the rhythm of church bells. On festival days they still hang garlands at the door, a habit inherited from mothers who once sang to Diana. The bishop calls it harmless custom, then writes to Rome, asking whether it might be something worse. When the empire divides, the fear multiplies. In Byzantium, monks copy manuals on how to detect the devil's influence: cold skin, wandering eyes, refusal to eat the host. In the Latin West, penitentials' handbooks for confessors list new sins. Among them, mulier, quae, incantamenta, faceta woman who makes enchantments. The penance: 7 years of fasting on bread and water. The margins of those manuscripts are crowded with drawings, serpents, toads, crescent moons, half warning, half memory of what they outlaw. You find yourself in a village somewhere north of the Alps, centuries after Rome has crumbled. The houses are wood and thatch now, the air thick with smoke from peat fires. Inside one of them, a woman mixes a drink of honey and herbs for a laboring mother. She wraps the newborn in wool, ties a small charm of rohan around its wrist, and lays it by the hearth. The local priest hears of it and visits the next day. He blesses the child, sprinkles holy water on the threshold, and tells the woman gently that such amulets invite the enemy. She nods, promises to burn them, and hides 3 more beneath the bed. Her world is shrinking. The gods have been replaced, but not the need for protection. Folk rituals are folded into Christian festivals: Candlemas for the old firelights, All Hallows for the feasts of the dead. The people adapt faster than the theologians, who fill their sermons with unease. If Christ is supreme, why do the old customs still work? The simplest answer is the most dangerous, because another power lingers. Thus begins the logic that will define the next 1,000 years. If grace belongs to God, then every other miracle must belong to his adversary. You move through time like smoke through rafters. The year is now 906. The Canon Episcopi is written, a document that tries to settle what the Church cannot decide. It declares that women who claim to ride with Diana by night are deceived by demons. The flights are illusion, the devil's dream. The text intends to dismiss belief. Instead, it memorializes it. For every cleric who preaches that witches do not exist, another whispers that denial only emboldens them. The argument becomes its own contagion. The idea of the witch-half myth, half warning, crystallizes into shape. You return to the small house of the healer, now separated from her Roman ancestor by 600 years, but bound to her in gesture. The walls are rough timber, the floor beaten earth. Dried herbs hang from the beams, sage for cleansing, yarrow for wounds, mugwort for dreams. On the table lies a wooden rosary beside a bone-handled knife. She prays before she cuts, uncertain which part of her prayer the heavens will hear. Outside, the villagers light bonfires on the hill to chase away disease. The Church calls it a festival of purification. The old people call it what it always was, the fire that keeps winter from coming back. As dawn breaks, smoke clings to the valley like a second sky. Somewhere a rooster crows. Somewhere a bell rings for morning mass. Between them walks the woman the future will know. witch barefoot in frost, carrying a bundle of herbs, her breath turning to mist that looks for a heartbeat like wings. The burning times you wake to the sound of bells again, but they ring differently now. They no longer call for prayer. They call for witnesses. The century is the 15th, though it feels much older. Europe has grown dense with towns, with smoke, with rules. Timber-framed houses lean inward across cobbled streets, their upper stories almost touching, as if the world itself is closing in. Every square has a scaffold. Every church has a confessional. Somewhere inside those walls, parchment and ink are turning suspicion into law. The malleus maleficarum, the hammer of witches' lies, open on a wooden table. 2 Dominican inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, write by candlelight. The air smells of tallow, sweat, and heated iron. Their book argues that witchcraft is not superstition but heresy, a crime against both heaven and crown. They quote scripture, law, rumor. They instruct judges on how to recognize a witch, how to extract confession, how to keep the soul intact while the body fails. When the ink dries, their words will travel faster than any sermon ever spoken. You step outside into a village square somewhere in the Rhineland. It is market day. Stalls of apples and pewter sit beside a post blackened by old fire. The people trade news and fear in the same breath. A widow accused of ill wind will be tried tomorrow. A cow miscarried after she walked past. The priest blesses the crowd and reminds them that the devil hides in plain sight. The baker crosses himself. The midwife looks away. The children listened closely. The line between neighbor and threat is thinner than smoke. At night you follow the officials through narrow street toward the jail. The accused sits on straw, wrists bound with rope stiff from use. She wears a coarse wool dress, torn at the hem. Her hair is matted with sweat. On the table beside her lie the instruments of persuasion, thumbscrews, cords, a jug of water for the question. The inquisitor asks if she consorted with spirits, if she flew, if she blighted crops. At first she denies. After hours she says what they already believe. Each answer is copied into the ledger as proof that witchcraft spreads by confession. The trial itself is theater. The judge wears scarlet robes. The notary writes as though transcribing revelation. The crowd gathers in silence until the first crack of fire, when the smoke rises. So does the story she confessed. She floated, she cursed. The ashes confirm what cannot be proved. Children are warned not to stare too long at the sky, lest they see her again in its clouds. Across the continent, the pattern repeats. In Germany and Switzerland, hundreds burn within a single season. In Scotland, the word which replaces healer in parish records. In France, the perennial villages empty one by one. In Salem, across an ocean yet to be crossed, echoes of these fires will someday return under Puritan names. You walk among the documents laid. Historians will count parish, registers, court decrees, lists of those executed. Each name is accompanied by a reason so ordinary it feels deliberate. A failed harvest, a storm without thunder, a stillborn lamb. The machinery of blame is efficient. It feeds on coincidence. You realize that the true fuel of the fires is paperwork, not faith. The Church insists that confession redeems, The state insists that punishment deters. Between them, thousands vanish. Many are women, some men, a few children. Some recount, some sing hymns until the smoke takes the words away. In one report from Warsburg, a boy of 12 is executed for learning the charm of flight. In another, a midwife is burned beside the infants she failed to save. The sentences differ. The lesson is constant. Knowledge outside authority is treason. You pass through towns where fear becomes architecture. Windows narrow to slits. Crosses hang above every door. Artists carve demons with female faces into church pews so worshippers will know what evil looks like. Printers flood the markets with pamphlet woodcuts of witches flying backward on brooms, kissing toads, dancing with goats. The images sell faster than bread. Illustration becomes indictment. The witch you saw grinding herbs now appears in hundreds of copies, her gesture frozen forever as guilt. Not everyone believes. A few scholars Agrippa Wea Montaigne whisper that hysteria, not heresy, drives the flames. They write cautiously, choosing reason over zeal, and are thanked with exile or silence. One writes, "The devil needs no advocate when ignorance will do." His book is banned within the year. Centuries of night pass, measured by execution. The Renaissance dawns, but its light avoids the scaffold. While painters in Florence discover perspective, inquisitors in minds perfect interrogation. While explorers chart new continents, jurists chart new categories of sins. Progress and persecution share the same century, as if enlightenment requires a shadow to prove its brightness. You stand once more in a valley, not unlike the one where the healer once walked. The smoke that hangs here is thicker, darker, the product of many fires. Beneath it lie villages, emptied of their midwives, their wise women, their storytellers. The knowledge that once kept them alive has been branded unholy and erased, yet it lingers in fragments, a recipe half-remembered, a charm spoken under breath, a superstition disguised as prayer. It survives in the gaps where doctrine cannot reach. By the early 18th century, the fever begins to fade. Courts grow skeptical. Monarchs prefer order to hysteria. Trials cease not from mercy but from exhaustion. The last recorded witch in Europe is executed in 1782, burned in the Swiss canton of Glarus, for blighting a harvest that failed from frost. Her name is Anna Glady. The newspapers call her the last witch, though others will follow under quieter names. When the smoke finally clears, the air tastes of iron and regret. Churches are rebuilt, towns repopulated, but the silence left by those who burned hums beneath every sermon. You understand now that the fires accomplished nothing except memory. Each spark lit another rumor, another story, another superstition to replace the one it destroyed. The witch never vanished. She transformed from body to myth, from ash to archetype. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of damp earth and extinguished torches. Morning light spills across the ruins of a gallows hill. Grass grows where stakes once stood. Insects hum over the soil that fed on fear. You realize that history has buried its shame under the same ground that once nourished belief. The circle is complete. You walk away as the bells ring again morning mass for a world that believes itself redeemed. But somewhere in kitchens and gardens, in the whisper of herbs crushed underfoot, The old craft stirs quietly, waiting for another name. Tools of the craft, you enter a room without time. The walls are stone, the air cool, faintly scented with ash and lavender. The light comes from nowhere in particular, as if memory itself is illuminating the space. Around you lies a collection of objects, the remnants of 1,000 quiet rituals. None of them speak, yet each one remembers. The first is a knife, its blade narrow, blackened with age. It is called an atham now, but once it was simply a tool. The metal holds fingerprints, older than history used, to cut herbs, carve wood, or mark the boundaries of a sacred space. Contrary to legend, it was never a weapon. It was a stylus for intention. In museum glass, it looks harmless, but you can still sense the geometry of its use. A circle traced into soil, a line drawn between worlds. Even today, when modern practitioners raise anathema, they're repeating an act older than agriculture, the act of definition. Beside it lies a cup, deep and simple, fashioned from clay. The surface bears the fingerprints of its maker. Archaeologists find such vessels buried in fields and wells, sometimes filled with burned grain or melted fat. They call them offering pots. To the people who made them, they were extensions of the body mouths that spoke in liquid, bellies that fed the unseen. The shape endures across millennia, in chalices, cauldrons, and baptismal fonts. Every civilization invents it again, never realizing it's the same hand redrawn. Next to the cup sits a mirror. Its surface is polished bronze, dulled by centuries of air. When you tilt it, the light bends like liquid metal. Mirrors were never meant for vanity. They were meant for communication. Ancient Egyptians placed them in tombs so the dead could see their way home. Romans used them for divination, watching for faces that weren't their own. Medieval wise women would fill them with water or ink, tracing shapes that appeared between reflections. To gaze into one was to risk conversation with whatever answered back. Even now, when glass and mercury have replaced bronze, people still hesitate before breaking a mirror as if it might scream. Further along the table, bundles of herbs hang, upside down, sage rue, mugwort, yarrow. Their leaves are brittle, their scent sharp and clean. Each was once both medicine and metaphor. Mugwort for dreaming, rosemary for memory, basil for courage, rue for repentance. The recipes vary by century, but the logic never changes. Every plant embodies a story about survival. To mix them is to narrate health. The witch's garden was a library in Greenevry, stem, a line of inherited texts. You find a broom, smaller than you expected, its handle carved with runes. Its bristles are bound with red twine, frayed from use. Once it was simply a domestic tool, but in times of fear, even cleanliness became suspect. Women sweeping thresholds at night were said to be flying. The truth was quieter. The broom marked territory, brushed away illness, symbolized renewal. In rural Europe, couples still leap over it to seal a union aim, echo of flight as joy, not sin. There is a cauldron, squat and wide, its iron pitted from fire. It sits on 3 legs, a design as old as metallurgy. In Celtic myth it was the vessel of rebirth, in medieval kitchens a symbol of nourishment. Later, when witchcraft became accusation, it transformed into evidently perfect prop for fear. Yet its purpose never changed. It was always the place where separate things met and became something new. Whether stew, potion, or philosophy, the principle is the same. Transformation through heat. You pass a book lying open on the table. Its pages are hand-stitched vellum, filled with notes in cramped Latin and Middle English. Between the margins bloom small drawings, planets, eyes, flowers, sigils, the grimoire, the book of shadows, the diary of trial and error. Each entry begins the same way. An observation, a correction, a wish. These books were not manuals of evil, but notebooks of experiment. Many resemble the ledgers of early scientists, eyes of weights, measures, and results. When authorities confiscated them, they often copied the recipes into their own archives. The knowledge never stayed destroyed. On the far shelf rests a bell, green with tarnish. It's small enough to hold between 2 fingers. In temples and cottages alike, bells marked transitions between worlds. Their chime was both invitation and dismissal. Monks rang them to begin prayer. Cunning folk rang them to end a séance. Sound was the first line of defense, a vibration reminding the unseen that the living were still present. Finally, there is light. A single candle burns at the room's center, wax pooled around its base. Flame has always been both witness and participant, the first altar, the first companion. Its warmth changes everything it touches. Its motion never repeats. The ancients saw in it the soul made visible. Every ritual, whether pagan or Christian, ends the same way. Someone extinguishes the flame and watches the smoke twist upward, carrying a message too complex for words. You look around once more. The tools of the craft are simple knife, cup, mirror, broom, book, flame. None of them hold power on their own. Their magic is repetition, the hand that grips, the breath that names, the attention that dignifies use. Even now, in the laboratories and churches that replaced these chambers, the same instruments survive in disguise. Scalpel for knife, chalice for cup, telescope for mirror, scripture for grimoire. Function redeems superstition. The room grows dimmer, or perhaps your eyes adjust. Each object begins to fade, returning to the time it came from. The candle gutters once, twice, then stees. Smoke drifts like a signature on the air. You realize that these were never weapons or relics, the tangible half of intention. When the world stopped believing in magic, it didn't destroy the craft. It only renamed it. You step back into the corridor of history, where the fires are starting to burn again. The inquisitors are sharpening pens instead of knives, and the night is about to fill with smoke. The tools of creation will soon be mistaken for the instruments of heresy. Ashes and enlightenment, you stand in the century that calls itself awake. The fires have dimmed, but the smell of them still lingers in parchment and in conscience. Europe is rebuilding printing. Presses chatter where gallows once stood. Scholars sit where judges used to. They speak not of demons, but of evidence. The Enlightenment arrives like a slow dawn, cautious and uneven. In the lecture halls of Leiden, Paris, and Edinburgh, physicians examined the same plants once gathered in secret by condemned healers. Mandrake and belladonna are labeled with Latin names and stored in glass. The apothecary's shelf replaces the witch's cupboard. Knowledge changes uniform, not substance. You walk through one of these new laboratories. The walls are whitewashed brick. Sunlight filters through diamond-paned glass. A man in a powdered wig holds a sprig of foxglove with tweezers, noting how a small dose steadies the heart while too much stops it. He writes digitalis, pepuria in neat copper plate, and smiles as if he's invented mercy. The apprentices behind him whisper that peasants have used it for centuries. They are right, though no one writes their name. In the libraries, books, once hidden behind church walls, are copied and bound in leather. The Malleus Maleficarum is reprinted, not to condemn but to analyze. Philosophers treat it as symptom, not scripture. Voltaire calls witch trials the shame of human reason. Others trace their causes through fear, famine, politics. Superstition becomes pathology. Faith becomes psychology. The age that prides itself on reason dissects its own nightmare. Still, belief does not vanish, migrates. Hope you attend a salon in London circa 1750. Candles drip on polished wood. The air smells of tea and wax. Gentlemen debate magnetism and the invisible fluid said to flow through all things. At the edge of the room, a young woman demonstrates animal magnetism, passing her hands above a glass of water until it trembles. They call it science, but the gesture is old, the same smoothing motion once used to bless a child or calm a storm. Franz Mesmer will soon codify it as therapy. Later generations will rename it hypnosis. Every century rediscovers enchantment and writes a new formula around it. Beyond the drawing rooms, the countryside still keeps its charms. Farmers hang iron over doorways. Mothers sew coral beads into infant sleeves. The parish priest blesses the fields, unaware that the pattern of his steps traces the same circles drawn by pagans 1,000 years before. The Enlightenment reforms the mind. Habit keeps the soul archaic. You cross the channel to Scotland and Germany, where the last embers of persecution flicker. In some towns, accused women are quietly acquitted. In others, judges commute fire to exile. The word which begins to fade from verdicts, replaced by fraud or delusion. By the late 1700s, it belongs more to folklore than to law. Ballads turn martyrs into legends. Painters turn them into allegory. The witch becomes muse again, terrifying, beautiful, safely fictional. Arts sees what theologians abandon. In Rome, Goya Fuseli and Delacroix paint her flying over sleeping cities, not to curse them, but to show imagination unbound. In their canvases, the broom becomes symbol of flight from conformity, the cauldron a crucible of creation. The same image that once justified death now sells prints in galleries. Horror becomes heritage. You wander through a printing shop in Frankfurt, presses clattering under the weight of new pamphlets, almanacs, herbals, grimoires, reissued as curiosities. The public cannot decide whether it believes. They laugh at superstition by day and consult fortune-tellers by night. Rationalism and mysticism walk arm in arm, pretending not to notice each other. Then the century tilts again. Factories rise. Gaslight replaces candlelight. Cities swell with smoke and machines. The world grows measurable, but lonelier. In that silence, the old hunger returns, a need for meaning, not printed on blueprints or ledgers. Spiritualism blossoms like mold in a sealed jar. Seances, table-turning mediums, modern language for ancient longing. The witch's grandchildren return in fashionable mourning gowns, calling not on demons, but on the departed. Technology provides new miracles. Photography catches ghosts in light. Telegraphs whisper across oceans. The invisible is credible again. You realize the pattern never ended. Every attempt to banish the supernatural only refines its disguise. The alchemist becomes the chemist, the sorcerer, the psychologist, the summoner, the inventor. Each generation believes it has exorcised mystery, and each generation rediscovers it under another name. Outside, the air smells of rain and coal. A newspaper vendor calls headlines about progress, discovery, industry. You glance at the print and see the same old diagram beneath it, the triangle of fear. Faith and curiosity repeating itself in ink. The world congratulates itself on enlightenment while still touching wood for luck. Night falls. Somewhere a scholar closes his book and snuffs the candle. In the dark glass of the window, his reflection hovers for a moment rose. Quill, flamer, ghost of every thinker before him. The demon in the mirror has become reason itself, staring back in fascination. You step into the street. The cobblestones slick with new rain. Gas lamps blur in puddles. The city hums with quiet industries. The fires of old pyres are long gone, yet the light remains transformed, refracted, civilized. Humanity has traded stakes for laboratories, incantations for equations. But beneath both lies the same confession, the need to understand what moves unseen. The resurrection of the witch you stand in a century that worships invention and yet dreams of resurrection. It is the 19th century, and the machines have grown louder than prayer. Steam and soot rise where incense once did. Cities spread like iron gardens, but under the clang of progress, the old silence wets a hum that science cannot quiet. Humanity has mastered motion, not meaning. In parlors across London, Paris, and New York, the witch returns in whispers. Not the figure bound to stakes, but the figure behind the curtain speaking softly through the veil. The era calls her a medium. Seances bloom like theater. Tables tilt. Candles tremble, hands clasp over crystal. The dead have found a language for the modern, a rapping on wood, scrawling on paper, spelling their way through grief. The witch who once terrified the village now consoles its widows. You sit among the audience one winter night in 1848, the Fox Sisters of Hydesville, New York, summoned spirits in a lamplit room. Their voices are steady, practiced, almost kind. The crowd gasps as knocks echo from nowhere. Behind the spectacle lies hunger, a need to believe that death, like persecution, can be undone. When the newspapers print the story, thousands imitate them. Seances spread faster than sermons, and the witch becomes entrepreneur. Artists and writers follow. In England, the pre-Raphaelites paint enchantresses as saints of imagination. Lilith, Circe, Morden Le Fay Chuan, a mirror of defiance and beauty. In France, symbolist poets whisper her name in candlelight, claiming her as muse of rebellion. The witch becomes a code for every forbidden desire. Sexual, intellectual, political. She embodies what men fear and secretly admire. Autonomy, wrapped in mystery. Meanwhile, scholars begin to exhume her history at Oxford, Cambridge, and the Sorbonne. Antiquarians unearth trial records and folklore, reconstructing the lives erased by fire. Some romanticize them as priestesses of an ancient, lost religion. Others treat them as victims of ignorance. Either way, the witch is reborn as subject, not suspect. The ashes are turning into ochre. You travel forward to the 1920s. The world has survived a war but lost its faith. Industrial ruins stretch across Europe. The air still smells faintly of gas and gunpowder. In this exhausted century, mysticism flares, again like static before a storm. Occult lodges, theosophical societies, and Rosicrucian circles meet behind drawn curtains. Men in tailored suits discuss reincarnation. Women in velvet red tarot. Science has mapped the atom, but not the soul. The two seem closer than ever. Among them walks a retired British civil servant named Gerald Gardner. He collects folklore like others collect coins, charms, invocations, and fragments of rural superstition. In the 1940s, he will weave them together into a new tapestry and call it Wicca. His witches will meet not in secret, but in confidence, calling the old gods by new names, the goddess and the horned one, divine partners of balance. Their rituals will blend anthropology with intuition, circle casting, elemental invocation, the turning of the wheel of the year. The broom returns, not as evidence, but as emblem. You join them one midsummer night in the English countryside. A circle of 12 stands barefoot in grass, wet with dew. Candles mark the quarters. A chalice gleams at the center. Their robes are simple linen, tied with cords of different colors. The high priestess raises anathems, blade catching moonlight, like a sliver of Legic and traces a circle in the air. Around her, voices murmur the charge of the goddess. If that which thou seekest, thou findest not within thee, thou wilt never find it without thee. The words feel both ancient and new, a language rebuilt from memory and longing. For the first time in centuries, the witch speaks without whispering. By the 1960s, her voice multiplies. The feminist movement reclaims her as symbol of autonomy, the civil rights era as emblem of resistance. Posters declare we are the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn. The broom becomes banner. The circle becomes classroom. Universities begin teaching courses on witchcraft, not as superstition, but as sociology proof that belief can outlast repression. You watch the tide roll forward again to the internet age, into your own moment. Digital covens gather under moonlight glowing from screens. Hashtags replaced grimoires, spells circulate as images of candles, quartz, and miroir. Critics call it trend, participants call it connection. The language may be simplified, but the impulse is unchanged, to shape meaning in a world too vast to control. Every meme, every whispered affirmation is a charm rephrased. Modern witches live in apartments, not forests. Their altars are shelves of books, crystals, and phone chargers. They read Jung instead of scripture, brew tea instead of potions. Yet they honor the same contract to balance what is visible with what is felt. They speak of energy, vibration, manifestation. The terminology is scientific enough to pass unnoticed. mystical enough to satisfy longing. In a secular age, this is the new incantation. Still, the ghosts of the past linger in language. The word which remains obliged complement and curse, archetype and insult. Films, novels, and festivals resurrect her again and again. Some draped in horror, others in empowerment. Each retelling shapes her silhouette for its own reflection. The medieval pyre becomes the modern stage light. You wander through a bookstore one evening. The shelves glow with titles: the Green Witch, the Kitchen Witch, the Modern Coven. None of them would exist without the women whose names were erased. You trace your fingers along their spines and imagine them as gravestones, or perhaps as seeds. Either way, they mark persistence. Outside, the night has grown quiet. Neon replaces moonlight, yet the rhythm is the same. The hum of energy waiting to be directed. You can almost hear the echo of those earliest fires, but now it sounds different. No longer fear, but recognition. The witch has returned, not as threat, but as teacher, reminding the world that every law of nature once began as a spell spoken in hope. A century's contract behind you. Fire becomes candlelight, stake becomes altar, accusation becomes invocation. The line from the first woman who shaped ash into prayer runs unbroken through all of them, through laboratory and lecture halls, through protests and poetry. The witch survives because she evolves, because she understands that to be called unnatural is only proof of being ahead of nature's current. And somewhere beneath the electric sky, another generation gathers, barefoot on apartment floors, whispering intentions over cups of tea. Their breath rises like smoke, like blessing, like continuity. You realize that every rebirth of the witch is a rebirth of curiosity itself, the same spark. Humanity has always feared and always needed that eternal circle. You stand once more between fire and frost. The centuries that carried you here have burned down 2 embers, but the heat still lives in the ground. The word which has changed shape 100 times, yet its echo remains the same: inhalation before creation. A human voice asking the world to answer back. The landscape around you is no longer bound to any year. Stone and glass share the same horizon. Temples and skyscrapers throw their shadows together. The earth smells of rain and electricity, as though the planet itself has learned to dream in both languages, an ancient and modern. Somewhere, a church bell rings. Somewhere else, a phone vibrates on an altar of candles and salt. The 2 sounds merge until they are indistinguishable. You walk through a field that might be Europe or America or nowhere at all. The moonlight paints everything in silver memory. Beneath your feet, seeds germinate in soil, still rich from centuries of ash. The roots below remember every name: Wix Vinifica, Hex, Wise Woman, Witch. Each one a layer of sediment, each one a record of how power and fear share the same soil. A soft wind moves through the grass, and for a moment you hear all of them whispering at once. The healers and the heretics, the midwives and the mystics, the ones who spoke too soon, and the ones who stayed silent too long. Their voices overlap until they form a single rhythm slew, steady, patient. It sounds like breathing. The world that once hunted them now borrows their language. Doctors speak of energy. Scientists talk of fields and waves. Psychologists describe transformation as alchemy. The words of survival have become metaphors of progress. The witch has not disappeared. She has diffused to medicine, art, activism, every discipline that seeks to transform rather than destroy. You pause on a hilltop overlooking a city that glows like a constellation flipped upside down. Highways thread through darkness like ley lines reborn in asphalt. Towers glitter where once there were watchfires. Humanity still builds its circles, it only calls them by different name. Somewhere below, a woman lights a candle beside her computer. She whispers the same prayer her ancestors did, though she calls it affirmation now. Her breath flickers the flame. The air moves as it always has, responding, remembering. Every intention, every question, every act of faith, whether draped in superstition or science, still begins the same way. A quiet hope that the world is listening. The night deepens. You can feel the circle closing, but not ending. The witch's story is not linear. It coils back on itself like smoke, like time. Every era imagines it has buried her, and every era finds her alive in the mirror. In the reflection, you see not a demon nor a saint, but continuity, the oldest part of humanity, the one that still kneels beside the fire, still asks how light is born. The wind reases again, carrying the scent of herbs and rain-soaked earth. It smells like every century at once. You tilt your head back and look at the sky. The constellations haven't moved much since those first priestesses counted them. Orion still raises his arm. The Pleiades still shimmer like spilled salt. The universe turns patient and indifferent. But within that turning, meaning persists. You think of the first woman who scattered ash across a field, the Minoan priestess with snakes in her hands, the healer walking barefoot through frost. You think of all who followed, burned, buried, silenced, or reborn, and realize they were never separate stories. They are one continuous breath, drawn and released through time. The night exhales. The horizon blushes with the faintest light dawn or dusk. It hardly matters. Every ending is another beginning. The circle holds. You close your eye. The world hums softly, like a heartbeat shared across centuries. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a new voice begins to speak, curious, brave, unafraid of its own reflection. The cycle turns again. You've traveled a long way tonight, through centuries of belief and doubt, through fire and silence, through the long echo of human fear and human wonder. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking with me through the dark. Every story I tell here begins in history, but it's the listeners who give it life. You, sitting in the quiet, letting the words slow your heartbeat. That's the real magic of this channel. Not witchcraft, not ritual, but connection, shared breath across distance and time. To everyone who subscribes, who comments, who leaves kind words about how these stories help you drift to sleep, you are the reason Whispering Tomes exists. Each view, each listen, each moment you close your eyes to these voices, you keep the fires burning. You keep the stories remembered. So, wherever you are listening in, a dark room beneath a blanket, with rain against the window or the hum of a fan, I hope this story brought you a little peace tonight. That it reminded you that even in the shadows of history, there's beauty and there's continuity. And there's always a light, however small, that refuses to go out. Take one last slow breath. Let it fall gently like ash. Let the night take what it needs and give you back what you need in return. Rest. Thank you for being part of this small, growing community of wanderers and dreamers. If you ever need to escape the noise of the day, you can always return here. The door will be open, the candle will be lit, and another story will be waiting. Until then, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, the past never truly sleeps. It only whispers. Thank you for listening to Whispering Tomes, Obscure Histories for Sleep.